Hey everybody, welcome to episode 433 of The Virtual Couch. I am your host, Tony Overbay. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. And today I want to start with a story. So we're going to go back in the time machine. I remember this from my very, very early days as a junior therapist, as a therapist trainee and intern. And this is one of those moments that really stuck with me. And I think it played more of a role of shaping how I think about therapy some 20 years later than I initially thought. It caused me to have some early thoughts, the big feelings around people's desires and dreams and the ever so delicate balance or this dance between hope and reality, especially in your role as a therapist. But I can only imagine somebody coming into a therapist trying to lay all these things out in front of somebody that feels a little bit awkward, maybe uncomfortable. And then now what do we do? Picture this. I'm at this training. I'm fresh out of graduate school. This is a change in my career. Now it's fully in place. I'm in my early 30s, just spent a decade in the computer software industry. And now I think I finally maybe found my place, found my calling. And I'm excited, but I am still so new. I have no clue what I don't even know that I don't know. And I'm eager to just soak up all the wisdom that I can. And I cannot even remember the exact year. I wish I could track down the therapist who led this training to test my memory. But his words left a very strong impression that I still do believe I'm hearing them today. So he started with this question, and he asked the entire room of therapists, how many of you tell your clients that you can truly be anything that you put your mind to? And I really remember almost everybody's hand shot up, including mine. I mean, of course, right? Because as therapists, you want to empower people. You want to inspire them to reach for their dreams. You know, it's basically like in the job description and why you get into the business. And again, this is 20 years ago where the stigma around mental health was still pretty heavy. So you just felt like, man, I must deliver. This person does not have the internet. They do not have all the places that they can go. This is up to me. So then he asked us to pause and he said, give me a little bit of grace. And then he laid out a very hypothetical scenario. He said, so imagine a guy comes in to your office. He's in his mid 60s. He's struggling with his own mobility and he has significant weight challenges. And he comes to you and said, I do not want to leave this earth without achieving my dream of becoming the oldest person ever to play in the National Basketball Association. And he's never even really played organized basketball and doesn't really watch much basketball either, but he really has just wanted to play in the NBA. And the room went quiet because you could feel this tension because it was such a powerful question. Do we as therapists say, you can absolutely do it. You can do anything you put your mind to because we want to support his dream? Or do we feel like I must gently guide him toward a place of acceptance, toward reframing his aspirations, his hopes, and his dreams into something a little bit more realistic, or actually a lot more realistic? And then what actually followed was one of the most heated debates that I've ever witnessed in a therapist training room. Because on one side, there were people saying, well, who are we to tell somebody that their dream is invalid? Maybe his goal isn't actually about making it to the NBA, but it's about living with a passion and a purpose. And other people would argue, but isn't part of your role as a therapist to help the client face reality, to protect them from the disappointment of chasing something unattainable, because we know what that's going to look like after he recognizes that, what was I thinking? And I can't even believe that you didn't tell me this. You didn't call me out on this when I brought it to you. And the moment stayed with me for a couple of reasons. First, it was an early glimpse into how nuanced I think therapy can be. What is my role? To support or to motivate or to hold accountable or to challenge or to question? And then what actually comes up for me? Now I actually wanted to be in the NBA too, but my subconscious will never allow this guy to achieve that dream, or that would mean that there's more that I could have done. Maybe I could have done something like that too. But then in second, it really forced me to think about that balance between fostering hope and helping clients explore their dreams and what are their feelings that are underneath those dreams and where are they coming from and what are their limitations and how can discovering those actually be very beneficial, and how can we eventually tie all this back to their parents and all of that with empathy and with compassion. So here we are 20 years later, and I still think about that experience and all the feels that can come along with it. I can find myself getting passionate about it right now. So today, I want to explore how this story ties into a broader conversation about self-esteem versus self-compassion. Something that I covered on here a couple of weeks ago with my associates, Marla and Nate Christensen. I highly recommend that you go find that episode. And this is all based around Kristin Neff, who is a leading researcher in self-compassion, has been writing about extensively for over the last 2 decades. Because she explains that self-esteem is often about comparing ourselves to others, that it's about feeling good enough, or it's by believing that we are special, successful, or above average. But here's the catch though. What she shows in her research is that not everybody can be above average all the time. And she had some really funny stats that she shared. And in her research, she showed that 90% of people think that they're better than average drivers. And I would definitely put myself in that category. Even, she said, those who have recently been in accidents. So self-esteem can sometimes become this fragile thing because it's dependent upon external validation. And it's also dependent upon things like comparisons. And not to go off on too much of a tangent, I remember reading the book Radical Acceptance, and there's a quote there by the author Tara Brach. And she brought this thing up about comparison. And I thought it was really fascinating. She was talking about, in a spiritual context, the concept around Buddhism. And she was saying that it offers this challenge to a cultural worldview that she references that the Buddha taught that human birth is a precious gift because it gives us this opportunity to realize the love and awareness that are part of our true nature. So she said, spiritual awakening becomes this process of recognizing our essential goodness, our natural wisdom, our compassion. She said, in stark contrast to this trust in our inherent worth is our culture's guiding myth, which is more around the story of Adam and Eve and their exile from the Garden of Eden. We might forget its power because it seems so worn and familiar, but the story shapes and reflects this deep psyche of the West. Because this message of original sin, or kind of the what's wrong with me story, is unequivocal. Because of our basically flawed nature, we don't deserve to be happy or loved by others or at ease with life because we're outcasts. And if we are to re-enter the garden, we have to redeem our sinful selves, and we have to overcome our flaws by controlling our bodies, controlling our emotions, controlling our natural surroundings, controlling other people. And therefore, we must strive tirelessly, working, acquiring, consuming, achieving, emailing, overcommitting, and rushing in this never-ending quest to prove ourselves once and for all. And I felt like that tied in a little bit to Kristin Neff's research, where she's saying that this self-esteem that we constantly talk about and that we want to develop is maybe more fragile. And again, dependent on external validation and then comparisons. Because I think it's safe to say that comparison can be a really, really dangerous thing, especially if you are looking, let's take the social media example, which is the obvious one. And I can look and see these ideal lives that other people are living. It lowers my self-esteem because I feel like I am not living as good of a life as these other people. And so this comparison becomes, if I can look better and do more or do better than these people that I can see, then maybe I'll be happy. Then maybe I'll have this self-esteem. So if we go back to the guy in the scenario that I laid out earlier, if his self-esteem is wrapped up in achieving something extraordinary, playing in the NBA at the age of 60, then it's easy to see how failure could actually start to lead to shame and disappointment and feeling like he's not good enough and what's wrong with him. And I have had plenty of clients who have continually felt like they needed to find that thing that made them special, that allowed them to leave their mark on the world, to make them relevant. And this isn't to say that people can't try to change the world, but I go back to this quote that Carl Rogers, one of the most influential psychologists of the 20th century, said, which he calls the curious paradox. And that curious paradox is that when I accept myself just as I am, then I can change. I think this is where self-compassion offers such a powerful alternative. Because self-compassion isn't about being the best or achieving a specific goal. It's about treating yourself with kindness and acceptance, even when you fail or fall short. And it's about saying, I am enough. I am worthy just as I am, imperfections and all. And I know that this is absolutely a me thing, but if you are a listener of the virtual couch, this might ring a bell. But I'm not even a big fan of the concepts of when you fail or fall short or imperfections and all, because this is the very first time that you're going through life as you, me as me, period. And what some might view as my imperfections are things called bald and 5'8" or 5'7" without shoes, or things like ADHD, because they are. That's what they are. They just are. And that is where I believe self-compassion is an absolute key. And it leads to a far more connected version of life, a connection to myself, to the present moment, to those around me, because we're just being and doing in this very moment. Check that out. What's your experience? Let me share my experience with you, because this is the way that we'll find true connection, not wasting emotional time and calories and energy wondering, why am I not taller? Well, I guess at least I am taller than that guy, so that makes me feel a lot better. Or why didn't I figure out certain aspects of my own life sooner? Why did I wait so long to get my ADHD diagnosis? And well, at least I did get it sooner than this other person. And just giving myself grace and compassion that I am actually figuring things out now, which means I could quite possibly continue to figure out things about myself and others and life as I continue moving forward. Now, there's data to support both sides of the debate. On one hand, you can set big, ambitious goals and they can inspire action and they can give people a sense of purpose. We've got the new year coming up and so many people are tied to New Year's resolutions. And if that works for somebody, then that is amazing. And you go and you do. But there are also others that feel like those concepts actually end up having more of a net negative effect and make them feel worse. I do agree, hope is a powerful motivator. Studies show that hope can increase resilience, it can improve mental health. But on the other hand, unrealistic goals can lead to things like burnout, frustration, a lot of shame, the I am broken, I am bad, what's wrong with me story. Because when people set themselves up for what could be failure, it can actually harm their self-esteem in the long run. Where does this leave us as therapists, or even just as people trying to support the dreams of those who we care about, or our own dreams? And I think the answer really does lie in value-based goal setting, something that we talk about a lot in therapy. What if the man's dream of playing in the NBA wasn't about basketball at all? What if it was about something deeper, a value like staying physically active or contributing to a team or pushing himself to try new things? Because if we can help clients connect with their underlying core values, then I think we can guide them toward goals that are both meaningful and achievable. But I go back to this concept of radical acceptance, which doesn't mean giving up on dreams. It means accepting the reality, radically accepting the reality of where we are and having this trust that we're going to continue to move forward with hope, with intention. For the man in that scenario, radical acceptance might look like acknowledging that an MBA career probably isn't likely, but embracing a new goal, maybe coaching a youth basketball team, joining a rec league, that might still align with his values. Or you can even look at it like it's good that he even came into therapy and said, this is something that I'm exploring, something that I want to do, because now that he started to do, now he will find other things along that path that might be of more value to him. But ultimately, I think the best work that we can do is help people navigate this balance, because we can validate feelings, we can honor dreams, and still gently guide people toward goals that will bring them joy and fulfillment. And I'm not just talking to other therapists. If you are somebody that is really still stuck on the, I don't even know what to do, then you're in the right place, because now it's just time to start doing. You can have this dream. Check this out. I still want to play in the NBA. That's wild, right? But what is that really about? What does that mean? Is that my own brain trying to wake me up a little bit and say, yeah, I'm trying all kinds of things here, but they're not motivating you. So I think I'm going to go big. I'm going to throw the Hail Mary pass. Because validating your own feelings, honoring your own dreams, you can still then gently guide them toward goals that will bring you some joy, some fulfillment, purpose. Because none of this, even for ourselves, is about crushing somebody's hope. It's about creating a life that feels rich and a life that feels meaningful no matter where they start. And I believe that job of a parent is to be right there to provide this secure attachment, this home base to operate from, so that as my kids want to do things, want to explore things, if I immediately say, I don't think that's a good idea, that's pretty clear that's a me issue. But why don't I first find out what it is that they want to do? And one of the best things that you can do is then say, how can I show up for you? How can I support you? Because a lot of times that's maybe the kid or somebody close to us, a friend, a spouse, that they're just trying to test the waters themselves. And if you then immediately say, I don't think that's a good idea, I don't think you should do that. There's a story, a current story of my son that I think is a really fascinating one. He was playing college basketball. He decided he didn't want to play anymore. That was hard for me. I liked saying I had a son playing college basketball. I already bought the t-shirts. I was ready to go to the games. And then he said he wants to be a pro golfer. And immediately my first thoughts were, hey, bud, you really haven't played a whole lot of golf. I don't think that's a good idea. But that's a me thing. I've never been him. So instead, I was able to say, tell me more about that. What does that look like? And just a couple of weeks ago, he passed his PAT, this test, to one of the big steps on becoming a pro golfer. That was a huge accomplishment. And it made me realize this thought I've had so often of, don't be the one that crushes one's dreams. But then my next thought is, let life do that to them. But it's maybe a little tongue in cheek. But in reality, though, had I shut down his desire to become a pro golfer, could he have gone the rest of his life thinking, man, I could have been a pro golfer? Where instead, it's easy for me to say, go for it, man. What can I do to help? Anything I can do to support you? Because then a lot of times people start down that path, and then that's when they realize, maybe this isn't for me. And I think that's more of what life's about, more of what a secure attachment looks like. Hey, I'm here right beside you. I'm offering you a home base that you can operate from, and you go and explore. Because a lot of times, once that person accepts that this is who they are and this is something that they've always wanted to do, and nobody's pushing back against that, then I think often they will then see that either that is something that they really want to do, Or they'll get into that position and say, oh, okay, I always thought that this would be different, but I feel safe enough now to admit that and move on to whatever's next. But not long ago, I reached out to some listeners and I asked the question, what comes to mind when you hear the words self-esteem? And I thought the responses were pretty interesting. One person said, self-esteem is about trying to feel good about yourself, which can be really hard, especially when I'm on social media, whenever I slow my life down, because I definitely don't want to be spending a lot of time with my own thoughts. Another person said, it's overrated. You can't always feel great about yourself, and that's okay. Another person said, self-esteem, it's about how people see themselves, but I think it causes problems because we compare too much. Another person said, self-esteem is about feeling good about yourself when you're doing well, but it sure doesn't help when you're struggling. And then another wrote in and said, self-esteem is about feeling good. And I don't know exactly where you're going with the question, but if I'm being completely honest, it's pretty easy when you're successful or when your hair looks good. Sorry, Tony. And your outfit's clean and you slept well and things are going well in your life. But that also means that self-esteem can be fragile, which I'm guessing is where you're going to go with this. So I think it's safe to say that most of us grew up learning about self-esteem, but now we're learning more and more that self-compassion might be the golden ticket or the secret sauce. And I want to beat this drum as loudly as I can because it really adds another significant puzzle piece to what I just like talking about so much on any and all podcasts. And that is some of the key points of acceptance and commitment therapy, that you are the only version of you, that you think and feel the way that you do because you do. And then let's get into the concept of psychological reactance, which is that instant negative reaction of being told what to do, why you can't use thought suppression. You can't just stop thinking about something. And I hear that so often in my office, I just need to stop thinking about it. Good luck. Stop thinking about the turtle right now wearing a top hat who's trying to cross a busy highway. I think we all just did it right then. And then think about how that, I just told you to think about it. Now you're probably saying, I will not think about it. But I believe that plays into our emotional immaturity, because somebody might be telling us exactly what would be beneficial for us. And we may even know that it would be beneficial for us. But the fact that somebody else is telling us what to do, and when truly nobody else knows exactly what it feels like to be you, then that psychological reactance kicks in and we suddenly sound like a little kid. I think it would be really good for you to start saving money. I don't want to. That's dumb. You're dumb. And then maybe they leave and now the inner child in us continues to be in charge, to have the mic. Everybody's dumb. Everybody's stupid. Nobody understands me, which then can often lead to what's wrong with me? I'm so broken, or nobody cares about me. And now we have to prove our worth. But what is our worth? Well, the immature way to go about it is to play at least I'm better than that guy game, because we're back to comparisons rather than, okay, give yourself some grace. Where's the compassion? And remember, when you were a little kid, your emotions and your feelings, they were big. And when you tried to express them, most likely you were told to knock it off. It's not a big deal. Calm down. We don't do that. We don't say that. Well, what did you do to cause that? So over time, we internalize those emotions. And we started learning that, believing this story that we were too much and our feelings were too much. And what is wrong with me? And why do I have these feelings? Because I'm not being encouraged to have them at all. But they were trying desperately to help you. Those feelings were those emotions, because you didn't have your big kid words to express yourself. You didn't have your big kid body to be able to jump in a car and go on a drive to cool off, or to drive to a gym, or to go to a therapist. Your little kid body was saying, okay, we'll remember these feelings and we will imprint them. We will encode them on your heart, in your head, in your gut. And then do me a solid, little version of me. When you grow up and you're big, you go heal us and eat all the ice cream that you want. At least for a little while, because ultimately nobody is going to do it for us, the healing part. But you'll do this for us, right? But then we grow up that adult body, and unfortunately we somewhere lost that memo. And now our body is saying, there's that feeling of not being enough. Now go fix it. But instead of finding our own purpose to fix it so that we know that we're enough for us, we still respond very immaturely. And we still say, nobody likes me. Well, okay, then big version of you, learn to like yourself. Nobody understands me. Okay, big version of you, learn to understand yourself. What is your meaning? What is your purpose? Well, what your body, what your emotions, what your traumas and what your fears and what your dreams are all about, and figure yourself out. Because you can do this. You are an adult now. So you could free yourself from all of your childhood, your adolescent, your teen, your adult trauma. But what you need now and what you needed then was compassion, grace, love, patience. The things that I would imagine you'd tell a friend if they brought all of these challenges, these issues, these problems to you. You have to love yourself. Okay, and if your inner child just reactants all over me right there, no, I don't want to. That's dumb. Okay, take two. How about this? What would that look like if you learned to love yourself? Can you imagine what that might feel like? So ideally, I would love for you to just take me on your train of thought. Tell me your hopes, tell me your dreams, your fears. Nothing is off limits. Nothing is going to sound too crazy. Who did you think you would be when you were a kid? What did you dream about? Because this is your journey. It is time for you to liberate that trapped inner child inside of you who really can't wait to spend some more time with you and learn to discover and figure out and rule out all those things that you thought about when you were a kid. Did you want to be an astronaut? I did. Totally. Turns out you have to know math. And I'm not a big fan of math, but who knew it wasn't just about floating around in space and bouncing around the moon and eating Tang flavored paste from a tube. I don't really want to do that anymore either. Think about how often we judge ourselves based on comparing ourselves to others, or how we're constantly trying to prove that we're good enough. And this is especially true when we recognize our emotional immaturity, because at that point, we really are looking for external validation. And if we don't feel good about ourselves, it really doesn't matter what somebody else is going to say. When we're looking for this external validation, so often we're just trying to be above average at everything, which when you think about it, again, not a big fan of math, but it's pretty mathematically impossible. But here's where it gets interesting. Just like we've talked about how you don't know what you don't know, many of us don't realize that there are other ways to relate to ourselves. Back to the topic of today, self-compassion. Let me share a couple of examples that I think show how this plays out. And I've had more than one client try their hand at singing or even comedy at an open mic night or in a coffee shop. And Kristin Neff, in one of her research papers, lays out this exact example so beautifully, and it is so true. But imagine you're gathering your courage. You're going to perform at a local coffee house, an open mic, whatever that looks like, whatever you're going to perform, comedy, poetry, music, and you ask your friends and your family or anybody who happened to come support you. And you ask them, what'd you think? And somebody says, hey, you were average. Now, if you're like most people, the word average feels like a punch to your gut. But here's where we want to pause and use this as our muse. What can this reaction teach us about ourselves? Why does being average feel so threatening to our sense of self? According to Kristin Neff, this is where self-compassion comes in. That instead of getting caught in that childhood defense mechanism of shame, that, oh, I must be bad, or putting our self-worth in the hands of others, self-compassion offers a completely different path. It's about treating ourselves with kindness and recognizing our shared humanity and staying mindful of our experiences without getting overwhelmed by them. Okay, the truth is, I probably was average. Maybe I might even been a little bit below average if I was brand new to this. But why would I think that I was supposed to be so incredible the very first time I tried something? Because I am trying it. I'm not going to be the best. It's part of growing and learning and part of this human experience. Because I love the idea that everything at the end of the day, or actually during the day as well, and at the beginning of the day, all day long is a me thing. Why am I disappointed that somebody else had an opinion that didn't make me feel better? Why do I want people around me who will only tell me the things that I want to hear? Well, I mean, actually, that's easy because it feels good to hear that I'm awesome at something that I haven't ever done before. So therefore, let me surround myself with people who will most likely tell me how great I am. If somebody doesn't agree with the others, well, geez, okay, who invited this person to Debbie Downer to put a big wet blanket all over here? Who's this jerk that's so rude? Now, somebody else tell me how good I was at this thing that I'm not actually sure if I really want to do or not, but I thought I'd give it a try. And most likely it's probably 10 times harder than I ever thought it would be. I can't even come close to anticipating how hard it would be when the nerves kicked in. Nobody told me that there would be people who wouldn't even be paying attention. And actually, nobody told me that there would be so many people actually paying attention. So self-compassion is what is necessary in order to truly review the game film and to be willing to take chances to know that I can be mediocre or average. And actually, that's okay. This is a very true confession coming. I remember I was dozens of ultramarathons into my air quote ultramarathon career when it hit me. I had always said that, if I would have been 6'6" or taller, I would have been a pro basketball player because I just loved the game so much. I wasn't bad, but I just wasn't gifted with the height. But then there I was, a mid-packer in the ultramarathon world, watching others who turns out were my age and older, starting to get sponsorship deals, starting to make money, doing what they loved. But I was different. I had 4 kids. I had a job. But hang on, the guy that just won that last 50 miler has 5 kids and he's an attorney. Okay, yeah, but still he was probably a runner in high school and in college. No, he was not. Okay. And then it hit me. I am a guy who enjoys running. And I was training about as hard as I think I could at that time. And I did okay. That's about it. But I loved running. I loved ultra running. I had a great time. I was able to eventually accept that fact. And that acceptance didn't then allow me to turn the corner and start winning races. No, I actually went back and looked at my Ultra sign-up account, and I was correct in that I took 20th overall one year in the Lake Tahoe 100-mile run, a brutal, beautiful race. But then I just saw that only 65 people actually finished. So that was okay, but definitely not as cool as I made it sound a lot of times when I talked about top 20 finish in this brutal 100-mile race. I remembered one particular year where I ran the American River 50 miler well, 7 hours and 50 minutes, my very best finish in the, 7 or 8 times that I ran this iconic race, this American River 50 mile race. And that was decent. I looked that up too. I finished 51st out of 688 entrants. That one, I could even say, all right, that sounds pretty good. But the top 10 finishers all beat me by over an hour and a half. And I was 11th in my age division. I was 42 at the time. So where am I going with this? For some reason, I was able to accept mediocrity in my ultra running career much sooner than with other areas in my life. But that actually made my running career in general far more enjoyable, less stressful. And it didn't lead to me not trying or giving up, which I think so often is the story that we tell ourselves about what might happen if we don't try and become the most bestest specialist person ever, which often then requires either putting others down to get there. Man, I did really well. Do you see how poorly those other guys did? Or if I didn't finish well, it makes it much harder for self-acceptance. Here comes excuses. Well, it must have been because if everybody in the family didn't spend so much money, then I wouldn't have to work so much and I'd have more time to train and I would have done better. So therefore, it is all your fault. And had you guys all not been so needy and demanding, then I probably could have been one of the greatest ultra runners ever. But I guess that isn't the case. And admittedly, self-compassion makes stories a little less exciting, honestly. Let's talk about the 2 versions of this Lake Tahoe 100-mile race story then. Okay, here's the first one. Oh man, Lake Tahoe 100-miler, one of the hardest, most difficult races you'll ever do. Hundreds of people are out there, hundreds of them on the course. The elevation, brutal. You really do climb to almost 10,000 feet and the up and down wreaks havoc on your legs. But I'll tell you something, one year I finished 20th and that was under brutal conditions. I mean, top 20 in a race like that, I don't even know how many people have finished, but one of the best races of my life. And honestly, I could have even done better had I not had to deal with a lot of family drama at the time and been able to train more. But wife and kids, they're demanding, seriously. Versus, oh man, Lake Tahoe 100-miler is definitely one of the hardest races I've run. Well, especially because I made a tremendous amount of excuses in my training, if you even want to call it training, foregoing anything that would have even remotely helped me understand what 3 miles of downhill without a break at all would feel like on my quads. Oh, and there are places within 10 miles from my very house where I could have simulated that 3-mile downhill, but I would just wake up a little bit extra sleepy on Saturdays and then just do my long runs around my house where it's absolutely flat, no elevation change. And I told myself that I'd start eating better several months before the race. But yeah, right. I actually used the fact that I was training for an ultramarathon to eat any and everything I could, which did not help me on race day. I can assure you, every pound that you're carrying is something I've heard like 4 additional pounds to your joints. So I was feeling it. And speaking of feeling it, once again, when the starting gun went off, I took off like I was an elite thinking, what if today I could uncork a legendary performance and I could actually finish in a top 10 or something, only to feel like I was dying when I felt my heart pumping out of my ear holes on the very first significant climb, when I also remembered, oh yeah, altitude. But I slogged through it. I finished in 20th place and then looked up afterward. There were only 65 people who finished total out of maybe 130 that started, but it took me a few hours longer than I anticipated. Now that does not sound as cool as the first one, but it's true. And it is full of self-compassion because I was just having a human experience. So back to the me things. Self-compassion, I think, is the ultimate me thing because it's about how we relate to ourselves in those moments when we feel inadequate or we feel imperfect. But unlike self-esteem, which often requires us to feel special or above average, self-compassion is about acknowledging that being human means being imperfect. And that's true for every unique version of us with all of our nature and nurture, all the attachment wounds, life experiences. And if I go back to the research from Kristin Neff, it is fascinating and honestly kind of funny. Again, 90% of drivers think that they are above average, even people who have recently caused accidents. So this is not just about driving though. It shows how we're all trying so hard to maintain this sense of being special, even when it defies logic. It's like we're all playing this impossible game where everybody has to be above average all the time to feel okay about themselves. So these concepts that Kristin Neff shared, self-kindness versus self-judgment, what she said was that self-kindness means taking a benevolent and supportive attitude toward ourselves instead of being harshly critical. And it involves actively showing concern for our own distress and trying to ease our discomfort, not because we're inadequate, but because we care. We care about ourselves. It means being emotionally available to ourselves during difficult times and responding with warmth, just as we would to a friend in need. Because think about how you would treat that best friend when they're having a really rough day. Hopefully you speak to them kindly. You try to comfort them and show that you care about their feelings. But when we mess up or we face challenges ourselves, we often do the opposite. We might call ourselves stupid or worthless or tell ourselves, just get over it. Self-kindness is about treating ourselves with the same care and understanding we would show a good friend. It's like being your own supportive best friend instead of your harshest critic, because that is not what is going to motivate you in the way that you believe that it will. Imagine you fail at an important test despite you studied really hard. A self-judgmental response would be, I am such an idiot. I'll never be good enough. I should just give up. A self-kindness response would be, all right, that was disappointing, and it is okay to feel sad about it because testing is stressful and I did my best. Maybe I can talk to my teacher about what I can do differently next time, or I can find a study buddy to help me prepare better, or I have to own the fact that, you know what, I actually did not study as much as I thought I would. She also talks about common humanity versus isolation. Kristin Neff says common humanity means recognizing that life challenges are just a part of being human. They are an experience that we all share. Now, when we struggle, we tend to irrationally feel like everybody else is fine and we're the only ones having problems. I hear that in my office, honestly, on a daily basis, that I'm the only one that is going through these things. So part of that I enjoy doing is normalizing, not trying to dismiss somebody's problems, but to say, man, that is something that I heard often, maybe even a couple of times already today. But when we think that we are the only ones having problems, it creates almost this frightening sense of disconnection that makes our suffering feel much worse. So understanding common humanity helps us feel connected rather than alone in our struggles, because we're all going through life for the very first time, and life is lifing all over us. I was going to say, have you ever scrolled through social media? But think about when you have scrolled through social media and felt like everybody else has their life perfectly together while you are struggling. There's a version of that isolation. But the truth is, everyone, and I mean everyone, even those people with the perfect looking Instagram feeds, they face challenges. They make mistakes. They feel inadequate sometimes. I talk to captains of industry, professionals, politicians, entertainers, you name it. And they are all going through things. Common humanity is about remembering that struggling is not a personal failure. It's just part of being human. It's like realizing that we are all in this together, even when our specific challenges are different. But you would even be surprised to often find out that a lot of the struggles that we're going through are similar. It's one of the greatest reasons to have things like support groups, because people feel a tremendous sense of relief when there's community around, especially a challenge. So let's say you're going through a breakup. The isolation response would be, nobody understands what I'm going through. Everybody else has perfect relationships, and I'm the only one who can't make it work. A common humanity response would be, heartbreak is something that almost everyone experiences at some point. Millions of people have felt this way before me, and millions will feel this way after me, and it's painful. It is. And that is okay for me to feel that pain, but it's also a normal part of the human experience of love. And then Kristin Neff also talks about mindfulness versus over-identification. So her concept of this is that mindfulness involves maintaining balanced awareness that neither avoids nor exaggerates our present moment experience without acknowledging our pain. Because we can't show ourselves compassion unless we're willing to acknowledge that I am feeling pain in this very moment. But if we become overly identified with the negative thoughts and those negative feelings, we do start to lose this perspective that we need to care for ourselves. So mindfulness, being mindful, learning to change our relationship with our thoughts and our feelings and emotions and recognize them, because they are going to tell us something. But that mindfulness concept helps us recognize that our negative thoughts and feelings are just that. They are thoughts and they are feelings. They're not a permanent reality. Imagine your emotions are like these weather patterns. Over-identification is like thinking that a storm will last forever, while avoiding your feelings is like pretending that the storm isn't happening at all. So mindfulness is the middle path. It is about acknowledging that the storm is happening right now. I can notice it, I can feel it, I can smell it, but remembering that it will pass. It's about being very observant of your thoughts and your feelings and your emotions and your sensations without just getting completely swept away by them or trying to push them aside. So let's say that you make an embarrassing mistake during a presentation, whether it's at work, school. Over-identification would be, I am a complete failure. My life is ruined. Everybody will remember this forever and I will never recover from this humiliation. Avoidance would be, that's fine, whatever, I don't care. I don't care what anybody thinks. A more mindful response would be, okay, I am noticing that I am feeling embarrassed right now, and that's understandable. Thank you, brain, for pointing this out to me, because I'm going to let this in. These feelings may even feel intense. Where do I feel them? Are they in my chest? Are they in my stomach? How big are they? Are they sharp? Are they dull? Is it just this constant feeling? but I know that they won't last forever. This is one moment in my life, not a definition of who I am. Let me share a very real example that just happened for me. Just this week, I had a situation with my podcast, Waking Up to Narcissism, that tested my ability to practice self-compassion. Boy, did it. I released the 8th episode in a series called Death by 1,000 Cuts, where listeners share their stories about the seemingly small but deeply damaging moments in unhealthy relationships. And this Death by 1,000 Cuts series explores how these minor incidents, which a lot of people will dismiss if they're not in these types of relationships, can gradually erode somebody's whole sense of self, especially when they occur over and over and over again without accountability on the part of the person that is inflicting these cuts. After releasing the episode, a couple of listeners reached out about audio gaps and some odd pauses and things in the recording. It took me a day or two because it was Thanksgiving, and then I checked, and I discovered I had accidentally uploaded an unedited version full of stops and starts, content that was meant to be cleaned up in post-production. And this created a perfect storm of emotions and an opportunity to observe how different mindsets, from harsh self-criticism to avoidance to mindful self-compassion, might handle such a situation. Why don't I break these down for you in 3 different approaches and how they might have played out in the scenario and share what I did. Over-identification, that response. I'm a complete fraud. Everybody's going to now know it. I built this whole podcast around helping people heal from narcissistic relationships, and I can't even edit my own audio properly. All those people who trusted me, they shared their stories, they're going to feel betrayed when they realize I am not professional enough to even check my own work before publishing. This proves that I have no business doing this podcast. It took 600 and something episodes, but I finally showed everybody what an amateur I really am. Those people who wrote in about the audio gaps probably told everybody else not to listen. All that work building credibility is absolutely ruined. Maybe this is a sign I should quit and never do podcasts again, and I don't want to be embarrassed like this. That is a very real version of a response. The avoidance response, whatever, it's audio gaps. Most people probably didn't even notice. And those few people who complained, they're being nitpicky. I mean, I'm doing this for free. I'm putting out tons of content. If they want perfect audio, they can go pay for premium podcasts. Everybody makes mistakes. It's not a big deal. I can't even believe that people wrote in. Okay, I get it. You pointed something out. Not even going to check the audio because they're probably exaggerating anyway. If people don't like it, how about they start their own podcast and see how hard it is? Okay, that one doesn't feel very good. And then the mindful response, which is the way I tried to handle this. I am feeling really embarrassed right now about missing those editing gaps. And that's understandable because I care a lot about providing quality content for my listeners, free or not, especially given the sensitive nature of what they share with me. So these feelings of shame, though, they're trying to creep in. But I recognize that making a mistake does not make me an imposter. I'm choosing to view this as an opportunity to demonstrate the very principles I talk about. Acknowledging mistakes, taking responsibility, taking corrective action. I really sincerely appreciate the listeners who brought this to my attention because it shows they care enough about the podcast to speak up. And I can feel anxious about the technical issues and replace the file while still staying focused on solving the problem step by step. It's one episode out of over 600, and how I handle this matters more than the fact that it happened. Because hopefully that response shows all 3 elements of self-compassion, self-kindness. I'm going to acknowledge my embarrassment without beating myself up. I am noticing I want to beat myself up. Then we have Kristin Neff's concept of common humanity. I'm recognizing that technical issues and mistakes, they most likely happen to all content creators at some point. And then mindfulness, trying to stay present with the uncomfortable feelings while doing everything I can to take practical steps to fix the situation. So I did fix the situation, and you can find that now on the Waking Up to Narcissism podcast. And I even added some bonus content in the front of that episode. So if you're listening, do me a favor, go listen to that episode. I think there were a lot of downloads that happened with the bad file first. So self-compassion doesn't mean avoiding responsibility. It actually means taking responsibility, but maintaining a balanced, kind perspective toward yourself. I want to wrap things up today with the wisdom of somebody that I think about often, but I don't talk about as much on podcasts, but that's Viktor Frankl. And you may be familiar with the name. He's also the author of a book called Man's Search for Meaning. And Frankl was an Austrian psychiatrist, and he survived multiple Nazi concentration camps, including Auschwitz between 1942 and 1945. But during imprisonment, he lost his pregnant wife, his parents, his brother. And in these, I think, the most unimaginable conditions, Frankl made a very profound observation that the prisoners who were more likely to survive weren't necessarily the ones who were physically strongest, but those who maintained a sense of meaning and a sense of purpose. And through his experiences, he developed a form of therapy called logotherapy. And it's based on this premise that finding meaning in life is a human's primary motivational force. And he has this just incredible quote where he says, between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. And in our response lies our growth and our freedom. And I think what makes his insight about the space between stimulus and response so powerful is that he developed this understanding in an environment where he had virtually no control over his external circumstances. But he discovered that even in the darkest moments, humans retain this fundamental freedom to choose that response to what's happening to them. And I know that it's not just that easy, because how do you build in that space that he talks about for that response? And this is why I love the concepts that Kristin Neff talked about with mindfulness, and why a huge part of acceptance and commitment therapy is learning to be mindful, to be present. Because here's what is fascinating about mindfulness from a scientific perspective, and this is my understanding, that when we practice mindfulness, we're actually rewiring our brain's neural pathways. Because research shows that regular mindfulness practice strengthens the area of the brain, this prefrontal cortex. Think of that as your brain's pause button, while it reduces activity in the amygdala, the brain's threat detection system, the place where the fight or flight response occurs. And this means that you're literally building the neural architecture that allows you to pause between that trigger of something that happens and then your response. And I think what's even more interesting is that a mindfulness practice increases the density of gray matter in brain regions linked to learning, memory, emotion regulation, perspective taking. So it's like you're building new mental muscles that help you step back from automatic reactions. So when you practice mindfulness, I recommend doing it on a daily basis, even if you don't believe it's doing much for you. But when you practice that mindfulness technique regularly, you're not just hoping to catch the space between stimulus and response. Oh my gosh, I hope I can do it. You're physically constructing the mental machinery that then makes that possible. So at a certain point, it just is. You are present. You pause. You can think of it like every time you take a mindful moment, whether it's focusing on your breathing, noticing your surroundings, simply observing your thoughts without judgment, you're strengthening these neural pathways. It's very similar to how a muscle gets stronger with repeated use, because then over time, this practice makes it easier to access that pause when you need it most. It just is there. When you are facing a trigger that you would typically launch into this self-criticism or this shame cycle, you are noticing, oh, what's the story my brain wants to tell me? That you're broken, you're not human. Okay, that old chestnut, thank you, brain. I think I'm okay. It's like without learning how to build in this pause, this mindfulness practice, we're like a computer that just runs on autopilot, executing the same old programs of self-criticism that we've been running since childhood. But when we practice mindfulness, we create that pause, that space that Frankl talks about. And in that space, that's where we can choose self-compassion instead of self-judgment. And we can remember we are human, that we're learning, and that this moment is just one part of our larger story. Because I think this whole concept, it directly ties into this discussion of mindfulness and self-compassion, because it reminds us that no matter how automatic our self-critical responses might be, or how ingrained our patterns of shame might be, we can learn to develop that space, that possibility to have a choice. If Frankl can do this space for choice in a concentration camp, I think I can certainly develop it as I am learning about my podcast while I'm sitting in the comforts of my own home. And so Viktor Frankl's principles of meaning making, I think they beautifully complement self-compassion, because he observes that those who found meaning in their suffering could endure it with greater resilience. This connects to the three components that Kristin Neff talks about of self-compassion. When we find meaning in our struggles, mindfulness, we're better able to see them as part of a larger human experience, common humanity, rather than as a personal failure. For example, recognizing that our pain might help us develop empathy for others now gives the pain purpose. So now that growth, we grow through discomfort because it has a purpose. Frankl emphasized that even in suffering, we can choose our attitude. And I think this mirrors self-compassion's element of self-kindness. We can choose to respond to our pain with understanding rather than a harsh judgment. He found that prisoners who could maintain their inner dignity, and that was done by showing kindness to themselves and others, even in horrific circumstances, were often more resilient. And I think maybe even more powerfully than that, Frankl demonstrated that meaning comes not just from positive experiences, but from how we handle adversity. And I think similarly, similarly, that word, I struggle with that every time. Similarly, self-compassion isn't about avoiding pain or making everything positive. It's about finding a way to hold our difficult experiences with understanding and wisdom. That is why mindfulness, learning how to be in this present moment, is so critical, so crucial, because it creates that space where we can find meaning in our experience rather than just react to our experiences. And it allows us to pause and then to choose how we want to relate to our pain, just as Frankl chose how to relate to his circumstances in the camps. I think Viktor Frankl's work reminds us that self-compassion is not just about feeling better, but it's about finding deeper meaning in our human experience, including our struggles and our imperfections. And that deeper meaning helps us respond to ourselves with even greater wisdom and kindness, even in, I think, the most challenging moments. So if I can encourage a takeaway for today, what I would love for you to remember, you're not broken, you're human. And being human means you're on a journey of constant growth and discovery. What a joy. Every time you pause and you offer yourself compassion instead of criticism, you're not just being kind to yourself, you are rewiring patterns in your brain that might have been in places for decades. You're choosing a new way of relating to yourself that's more sustainable, more nurturing, and ultimately more effective than this pursuit of perfection, of self-esteem. Please remember, this is the very first time that you have been you in this moment with this understanding, right now. And while the path of self-compassion might feel pretty unfamiliar at first, each small moment of kindness toward yourself is like planting a seed. And over time, those seeds grow into a garden of resilience and wisdom and genuine self-acceptance, because you're not just learning a new skill, you are now starting to pioneer a new way of being. And it is one that is full of compassion, and it is in each moment, in each time. I cannot wait to hear your experiences. Send me your questions, your examples. Thanks for sticking with me this long. I hope you have an amazing, wonderful week. Taking us out, per usual, is the wonderful, the talented Aurora Florence with her song, It's Wonderful, because I'm telling you, it can be. We'll see you next week. Thanks, everybody.
Compressed emotions flying past, our heads and out the other end. The pressures of the daily grind, it's one.